Southeast Regional Zoom meeting. Gina is not going to be with us today, so Dan Hecht and Seth Harrell will kind of take over the show from here. Some real quick norms. If you're not speaking, please mute so we don't pick up all the background noise. We are recording this. You will have the live chat feature. So if you go to the live chat feature, you can do the chat, and I'm not finding the live chat feature. Oh, there it is. I found it. And depending on how many people are online, just be patient. If you've got something to say or share, please be patient, wait, get in there. Or you can type a question into the group, and hopefully we get that answered. So without any further delay, Dan or Seth, you take over.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you guys doing? Hey, really just curious to see, and I think, Doug, you would provide some good input from the statewide perspective, what other regions are doing. I think most of us in the Southeast region, we're in a holding pattern. In my district, I think the big question we are dealing with right now is how do we continue with the food deliveries? We've been doing it daily since we've been out of school. There have been some concerns as the virus spreads into our area, whether or not it is a wise practice to continue. We're currently seeking some input from some area churches to see if they can kind of take over the volunteer efforts. But we really need some input there. So if anybody has advice on food deliveries, I'm open to suggestions. I'm going to go ahead and mute now.
Is anyone having their food delivery folks pre-tested, or are they just using general food handling gloves? I don't know whether they're using a mask or not, but I think that's been a concern, not necessarily in our state, but I think a neighboring state to the east had something that occurred, I think, by listening to the news that was kind of alarming. So I don't know what your practices are. They just started yesterday in Columbia with food delivery and some stations. So in the central part of the state, everyone's been on spring break until yesterday. So they all actually used Schoology as their online delivery, which crashed nationwide. So some neighbor boys in our neighborhood said that they were walking their dogs, and we were talking across the street, and they said that they could use their cell phones to do their Schoology assignments, but they couldn't use their laptops. And I guess that they'll get that remedied nationwide, but just one little small glitch.
Yeah, Doug, the only thing we're doing differently than other than general practice is anybody who volunteers to help has to take their temperature prior to either entering the building or entering one of our buses that is making deliveries.
Okay.
Morning, this is Jeff from Perryville. Dan, we've been using a local charity from the St. Vincent de Paul. We've taken our food to them, and they are handing it out to our 200 and some kids that are on our backpack program.
We're doing it, Jackson, we're doing it the same at some of our school buildings. And I anticipate this being more of an issue. I think, if I remember this correctly, Raytown out of Kansas City had postponed theirs for 2 weeks, maybe as of this morning or yesterday, because they had someone, I think a staff member that had been volunteering that had coronavirus. So I see that becoming more of a deal, particularly if we're doing that on site, which we're doing it at our schools, but moving forward, it may be best to try to find a different location in the community to do that, because if we ever have any hope of going back to school, that could be a huge issue if we had one of those staff members get it. but we're still trying to do the best we can. We don't, as far as I know, we're not checking temperatures. I mean, we're just doing the normal protocol of having gloves, wearing gloves and things of that nature. But I do unfortunately anticipate this being a bigger deal moving forward.
And on the same sanitation or security or safety issue was kids turning in homework or turning in packets. They were talking about letting them sit for amount of time until I guess the coronavirus dies after X amount of time without a live host. I'm not so up to date on that piece, but like maybe 48 hours or so, letting it sit somewhere till it dies, and then they can handle that paperwork. I know I worry about it because they're delivering mail to our houses, and they're using gloves, but that doesn't mean they can't transmit that virus over on the gloves to your mail. So I don't know. I've washed my hands about 4,000 times a day, and I've got cracks and cuts and everything else. So when I use the hand sanitizer, it kills me.
Doug, I'll just jump right in again because we had this discussion yesterday with our district administrators. Corey Crosno, one of our junior high principals, had mentioned that he had come across some information where that virus or the germs or whatever can stay on that paper for up to 4 days, and that it was recommended to let that sit for 7 days before it gets handled. And so for me, that was kind of startling, because from a perspective of trying to get to the point of grading assignments and getting work to our students, and then eventually maybe trying to collect that, that's pretty concerning, because right now we're not grading our assignments, and that's been a heavy topic of discussion for us. If we move forward and start trying to assess some of the things that we're giving out, that's definitely going to increase the traffic of things coming and going on our campus. And so we don't know what that looks like.
Does anybody know the actual time that I think it's a protein, but that virus lives on surfaces? Is it, 2 to 4 days, or is it longer? I don't know. I would go where you are. I think I would err on the side of 7 days and making sure it's gone.
Good morning again. This is Jeff from Perryville. We had a document sent to us yesterday that it lasts at least 5 days on paperwork and for mail. So we're collecting mail on Thursdays and sorting it out then on the next Monday. So it's set for the 5 days.
I know that Dan mentioned, and changed the subject just a little bit, but Dan mentioned that everything was kind of in a holding pattern. I think across the state, we've not heard of anybody being too drastic with anything. Spring sports are still on hold. I think there's been 2 districts, Warren County and another school district real close there to Warren County. They've canceled school for the rest of the year. They did so pretty early. I don't know whether, a lot of proms have been put on hold and a lot of graduations. I'm going to tell you, I'm probably encouraging you to save something for late summer or summer sometime, whenever this maybe ends, and try to sneak in a graduation, at least for as many kids as you can get in. Finishing without a graduation, I think, would be a little bit of a big deal for families. So I think if we keep that in mind, prom might not be one of those things that's doable, especially since they're talking about possibly a 2-month period of the 6-foot distance on people. That's going to be a weird prom if you're 6 feet away from everybody. So you're gonna have to have a pretty big space. But I think everything's really in a holding pattern. We at the association are in a holding pattern. Everything's kind of in the postponed
Hey, Doug, I think most of us principals would love to have that 6 foot distance at proms and other school dances. Be a lot more fun supervising that. Yeah, I agree with you. I think the late summer is looking most likely for us, whether it's prom and graduation. I think our kids are craving that connection though. I stopped at a gas station a couple days ago, just a mile or so away from school, and a senior who had graduated back in December and never gotten involved in anything in the school, your typical kid who slipped through the cracks. I walked into the door, and the first thing she said was, "Don't you dare take away prom and graduation, Mr. Hecht. We got to have it. I don't care when it is." And I think she's pretty symbolic of a lot of kids that, you know, they may not say it on the surface, but they are craving that connection that we do offer on a daily basis.
Right. I agree with that. And, you know, I've got all my kids are one's in college and all of them are out, but they're craving just some interaction with people. And we talk a lot on the telephone. I've been making phone calls to friends just so that I can maybe FaceTime with them or throw a bunch of friends together on a Zoom and communicate. They're all over the country. So that's been kind of healthy for me, is staying in touch with old friends and you know, family members, cousins, just somebody to talk to, because we are in this business because of people and kids. And when you take that component away from us, it's like taking food away from my puppy. He starts to go crazy. So don't let it get to you. Find other ways to touch base with people.
Dan, one of the questions I had for this morning is in looking at prom and graduation, and really open for anybody out there, what would be the latest possible date you would look at having something like that? I mean, if we move these events into the summer, how late would you go in the summer before you say, hey, this, you know, you look at prom, like this is something we just can't do? Obviously, graduation, we would all try to do everything we could to host something, but how far into the summer would you push that back?
I would go really as late as necessary. I think us smaller schools have more flexibility than you do, Seth. You know, you guys have gone to the Show Me Center for the last 10 years. But really, we're talking, you know, if school doesn't get started until August 24th, we might have graduation the week before.
Doug, have you heard in some of the other regional meetings, particularly some of maybe those larger schools in St. Louis, or even some that are comparable to us in Southwest Missouri, is anybody else out there? Obviously, they're having the same discussions, but have you noticed anything or picked up on any neat ideas or anything any of those other regions or those other schools are doing?
Well, you know, they haven't really shared a whole lot of neat or interesting ideas yet. I know that everybody's thinking about what they can do. I think when it gets down to crunch time, we may have some options that may vary. The Jostens reps, and I may have mentioned this the last time we met, they have encouraged you as principals to communicate with them because they have some virtual options that they would share with us. And I know John Glennon talked about, you know, having some speakers, maybe put them on. I don't know how they do this or how they would do it, but graduation virtually. So I would throw that idea to them and see what they can do for us or do for you. I'm still thinking if you have a graduation in August, that's probably going to be the best case scenario, and putting people in a facility. Hopefully we get this thing under control as far as the virus, and we're able to do something. If not, we're going to have the delay of school being an issue too.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that, or really any other topics?
Another
graduation a little bit. I know on the national level, that's something that the state coordinators are kicking around right now. That's a problem throughout. and they're working on solutions. Some of them are actually going to some of the universities and looking at their models, because some of the universities have done virtual graduation for many years now because of online learning and the way they're spread throughout the nation. And so I would look for some assistance in that regard, some ideas to start coming out from MoASSP as these coordinators start putting this stuff together. So to just give you an idea, they are looking at that. That is a nationwide problem right now. One of the concerns that I've run into is delaying graduation too much. I agree, June, July is a good go if we can, but I'm finding some of my recruits now are actually being, their ship out dates have been moved up sooner. So I'm going to lose a lot of my military kids because they're leaving actually sooner now than they were going to. So if you don't have an eye on that, you may want to check on who your students were who were going to list in the military, and if their departure dates have changed, because I know many of mine have.
Thanks, Chris. It's nice to know that people around the country are communicating and trying to solve some of these issues for us at the district level that are in the state, in the national type spotlight. Another topic that has come up, and it's around the state right now, is grading. And I think right now it was probably said pretty well in the St. Louis area by one of the principals, is that we can't get too hung up on grading. We need to spend a lot of time making sure we're connecting with the kids and making sure they're okay, and then work on either remediation or relearning items. New learning seems to be a difficult topic for a lot of districts. So, you know, it depends on where you are and what's going on technologically for your kids in your area. So that's been a discussion. Pass, fail, giving grades, no harm, all those things have been mentioned. And I don't know if you've got a kid, and here's a question for me as an old activities director. If we go to pass fail, and some schools or school districts are going to completely pass fail for all subjects, where is that going to land with the NCAA? Now, obviously, they're going to probably have to make some amendments or accommodations, but they haven't mentioned any of those, at least to my knowledge, yet. So I would be careful when you put all those core classes in pass fail, at least until we hear something from the NCAA on how they're going to handle things, and or the NAIA or MIAAA. So just thoughts.
I ask another question I had written down. Where do we stand as far as in our region of distance learning, and then schools that are ultimately now taking grades on assignments? Because that's been one of the biggest topics of discussion. So I just like to hear out from other schools right now to see what you guys are doing. I know some schools are on spring break, and so they're just now starting with distance learning. Or if you are doing it and now it's been extended, your break's been extended, does that change what you're doing with distance learning? So if any other principal out there at another school would just maybe touch on what their school is doing, that'd be helpful, I think, for all of us.
Seth, I'll chime in there. We're on day 10 of doing it. We basically 2 weeks ago went in, had school Monday, Tuesday, and then left Wednesday for virtual learning. And so we did Wednesday through Friday of that week, all of last week, and now we're into this week. I will tell you, in Dr. Boyd and I, and he's on this as well, spent last week having Zoom department meetings with our teachers, checking in, finding out what has kind of been the trend for the online learning, how it was going. We set an expectation that we were going to do the best we could continue. We had some real concerns as a staff. One of those was we know sort of what is lost in the summer, and now you're adding a back-to-back summer if we're going to be out the rest of the time for a solid 5-6 months. We know what would be lost in that, and we were scared of that. One of the things that we found, we are taking grades on a minimal basis I've asked them not to be rigid about it, to go back, Doug, with what that administrator was talking about the other day. But one of the things that we found was some of our students, and we talk about staying connected, some of our students kind of initially left with a snow day break attitude that we're just off. And they were a little bit resistant to come back, despite staff calling, despite emails, despite that sort of thing, until they figured out that we were serious about this work. And then they started to, and we made some contacts with parents, and then they started to get in the game. One of my concerns is, and has been from the beginning, if we don't have some accountability standard, there's two things that go on here. One, we want to stay connected with them. And what is their measure to stay connected with us if they see no real value in what's going on? Number two is, again, we want to stay connected with them, and normalcy is a good thing at these times. And we wanted to try to maintain as normal as possible in a very abnormal situation. So I've got some teachers that are teaching Zoom every day. They're being in to answer questions, and we're keeping a journal of all of that to make sure that parents are aware of what assignments are due daily, what Zoom meetings are happening, things like that, to keep our staff and students and parents connected with everything that we're doing. But we didn't really see where we were at as shutting down or just doing remediation straight through a feasible option for our students. I welcome other thoughts.
I agree with Chris. This is David from Jefferson, and we felt like if we just pulled the plug on not giving grades, that people would just quit, and that's not a good thing. We got off to a great start. There's no question. We did some extensive surveys, and I think that Chris is spot on. Some of these kids thought that it was a break, and after phone calls Friday and today, and sometimes sitting there with the parent, and the parent was saying, "Are you doing work?" and the kid saying yes, and they turned out you're not. We've had those discussions, but I would say that our general thought process is, as long as students are working and turning in work, to kind of not really hammer, if they would have the chance to improve on their grade from third quarter moving forward, or at least hold serve on it. If they're just not doing any work, they stand chance to not earn credit for that class. I don't know if we would tag that as an incomplete or not. I don't know how we'll handle that, or just give them the F. But we haven't crossed that bridge yet, because we're still trying to determine how many are and are not working. And then we came in this morning to send home our next round of packets to our kids to mail those out, which we've kind of got those tracked and monitored as well. So I would avoid going pass fail as well, just because I think there is NCAA, like Doug mentioned, but also to just, you've got a freshman right now, 3 years down the road, hopefully time will kind of heal things. And then you've got a group of kids sitting there with pass fail in one district and then not in another. That's going to be challenging. It could be challenging as well. I mean, I think at the end of the day, most people are going to be reasonable and have different things to accommodate it. But I would recommend, if you can, be generous, be mindful. A lot of our grades and work right now are based on participation other than just the work. And I'll be honest, a lot of teachers and students have enjoyed the process of getting online, chatting, and reworking the problems, and it's been a pretty good process for us. But there's always hiccups with anything. It's like I sent a letter to my parents, very simply. Distance learning, really, to get ready for it's a 3 to 4 month process to work out all the kinks. It was done in 1 week, so we have to be patient with each other, and so we are still working some kinks out. But as far as the grades, I'd keep doing it if you can.
Fredericktown,
Yeah.
Farmington.
They're May 1st.
I think that's what I saw.
I would agree with David. We're in Jeff County as well at Grandview, and we are also still taking grades. We felt, like he said, that kids wouldn't do the work, and surprisingly, they have continued to do the work. Students that don't have internet access, we have provided packets. We did a survey of the kids when they were there on Tuesday the 17th, finding out what students would need packets, and we provided those before they left. And then our teachers have been coming in intermittently, 2 at a time, and getting packets ready for the remainder of April for us. But seems to be going very well. We even have a process for drop-off, where we have the kids have a place that's safe. They can drop off. They don't have any exposure to staff. We disinfect them. And then after several days, we'll scan them in and send them to teachers. Teachers also are contacting their first hours every hour or every week, so they can kind of keep in touch with their kids. So that's why every all 300 kids are touched every week, on top of the other calls the teachers make. One of the things we had a concern about was, what have we missed? Because that's going to affect what we teach next year. So what we are having our teachers do is go through their pacing guide and highlight whatever they have taught this year while we were in school, that's highlighted green. Whatever they're teaching right now, what key priority standards they felt like they could continue on, we're highlighting yellow, and those things they're not getting to, they're highlighting red. Those kids transition into the next class next year. They know, oh, algebra class did not get this, so that they can kind of address that at the beginning of their geometry or algebra 2 class they're going into.
And Debbie, that's a great point. One of the other things I reminded staff, and keep in mind, April is usually, with standardized testing breaks and everything else, a pretty light time anyway. So if you really look at what curriculum normally takes place in April, it's not intensive. So you're trying to kind of keep an even keel during a time in which you would have sort of an even keel. To piggyback on something David said, and I appreciate you agreeing with me, David, always makes me feel better when you and I are a little bit of the same school of thought. If you guys are looking at an AMI plan to present to DESE next year, which allows forgiveness, I believe up to 36 hours is what's allowed on an AMI plan. If you're looking at that, to me, one of the things that I talked with my staff about, you don't want a culture right now that says, hey, when we're called off school, even though we're going to do digital learning, you don't have to do anything. This is a time to sort of slowly implement that culture and get them understanding that even though we're out of school, learning still may take place. Because if I recall correctly, in the AMI plans through DESE, part of the accountability for attendance was assignments, and how you're going to measure that attendance based on assignments collected and how you're going to collect that. I may be wrong. I looked briefly at the structure of that plan, but one of the things that you kind of need to think about as you go through this process moving forward, if you're going to file an AMI plan to where you can get the credit for the 36 hours missed due to snow, what kind of expectations are you starting to now develop, and how are you now changing a culture with your students that will transcend into those snow days and long-term absences in the future?
I'll think and explain what's been going on here at Festus. We're in Jefferson County too. Our last day of school was on March 17th, and at that time we were going to be out until April 3rd. So what all the teachers did for a couple of days was they created learning opportunities. It was not going to be required. The focus was more on material than it was on new material. We put all of that information on our district Google Drive for students to be able to do while they were gone until April 3rd. We kind of knew going into that a lot of students probably wouldn't take advantage of it, but we were going to use that time in order to kind of prepare if it was going to be an extended closure. And so what we did is we've stuck with that. Now we're out actually until April 24th. That's the earliest that we'll come back. But what we're working with teachers now is that they're creating new lessons, new learning opportunities that will be graded in a sense. It's only going to help students grade at this point. But we're focusing on the essential standards, the essential things that are left to teach this last quarter of the year. And teachers are calling all of the students this week to touch base with them to see who has the capability of going to online learning. Even though we're one-to-one, we need to see who has the internet access at home. And so that's kind of what we're in the process of doing right now, is creating those learning opportunities starting next week that will go into the grade book, but it's only going to help the students semester grade at that point. So that's kind of where we are right now. We kind of took a couple of weeks to get everybody comfortable at home, figure out what our plan was going to be. Now that the closure is extended, now we're moving into the moving forward in the content and assigning grades that are only going to help the semester grade. So that's kind of what we're doing at Festus.
Seth, you or Dan have any other probing questions, or?
No, sir.
I will touch base again with Gina, but why don't we go ahead and tentatively schedule next Tuesday? I don't know what April, what is that, 7th? April 7th. We'll go at 9 a.m. again. I'll send this out and Gina will get it sent out, or we'll get this sent out to everyone. It's fantastic to see. We had 38 people join this Zoom, which is fantastic. I would encourage you to join us on Wednesday. David Guerin, which is one of our digital principals from like 2017, is going to do a digital presentation on digital learning or remote learning and the challenges. So he may give us some ideas on things to do that might help. I know if you don't have the technology, sometimes that doesn't help much, but if you do have some technology, it would be worth the watch. But that's 10 o'clock on Wednesday, and look forward to seeing everybody there. If nothing else, I'd say we can end the meeting, and look forward to seeing everybody on either Wednesday or the following Tuesday.
Hey, Doug,
Yep.
can I try and get some feedback? I think Jackson is doing one subject a day. I was wondering if a lot of schools are looking at one discipline a day, or if they're trying to cover every discipline every day, or how they're proceeding as far as the coursework is that they're sending to kids.
Anybody out there want to answer that?
We don't do, go ahead. We don't do one discipline a day. What we have is a weekly planner. The students have what their work for the week is, and I'm going to share that with you guys in just a second so you can see kind of how our teachers connect that out. But the kids can choose how they do the work. They just are shooting for the end of the week having the work done. So some of our students were able to get all of their work for all 3 weeks done in 2 weeks' time. And so now they're wanting us to already give them more work. But we don't do this one subject a day. We let the kids kind of have some control and autonomy in when they and what they do.
Yeah, with one of the things that we found, and I'll give you the statistics just so some of you have an idea, and we were surprised by this. 8 years ago, when we went one-to-one, we were about 60% of our kids had connectivity at home. When I surveyed them just before they went out of the door, out of 570, we found about 12 that did not have connectivity at home of some kind or another. Of those 12, 6 of them belonged to 2 families. So we're kind of looking at trying to provide them individually some Wi-Fi access or hotspot access, but we're kind of keep going with the online learning, the schematics that we had set up, and we're finding it working very well for us because, like I said, when we surveyed, we found that they had that availability. The Zoom is something that we're doing just to support it. It's sort of tutoring time. Our staff kind of looked at it like collegiate office hours. We're going to give the work. We're going to give instructional videos to help. Those aren't interactive so much. And then we're going to set up Zoom time that we will be available that you can Zoom in and ask questions and we can interact with each other and do that. So they're trying to do that. And that's why those are going out in our daily announcements to avoid scheduling on top of things so that everyone can get a look at when these Zooms are being scheduled to kind of know, well, I don't want to put mine here because there's another freshman one going on there. And we're kind of working through the schedule that way. The one thing we did not want to do during this time too, knowing that our staff had childcare issues that they would be incurring, is to try to lock anybody into definitive schedules that did not work personally in their world as well.
I can tell you guys what we are doing in the high school. We set up a schedule for teachers to sign up to do Zoom meetings, just kind of a block of time, an hour or so for each one. And then that way they could not interfere with each other, because I said the only way that we could do it is if they did it during their class time, but kids aren't going to get up probably at 8 o'clock to do a Zoom meeting. So we signed up between the hours of 10 and 2, and that way nobody is overlapping either. So the kids can see that whole weekly Zoom meeting schedule and know which ones they needed to attend. And I also had another question. If you guys could address, how are you dealing with SPED students? Because that is our worry about taking grades. Right now we're just planning enrichment, but I get what you guys are saying. The kids probably aren't going to do it if it's just enrichment. But our concern is, how do we take grades and still make sure we're meeting the SPED requirements?
We met with our SPED group on that very early on. One of the things that we found collectively was most of it was extended time and reading tests. Those were some of the bigger issues, the hurdles we had to climb. And to us, we figured digital takes care of that. The reading of the test was a pretty basic solution. Extended time is something we're kind of giving everybody right now. It is, there's a lot of fluidity to when stuff gets turned in. One of the things that we also looked at, and our process coordinator, Jamie Drury, has been absolutely amazing in working with her staff. But what we kind of looked at was, because we're sort of minimizing this and like co-teachers aren't going to be in those co-teaching environments that much anymore, they could do a lot more one-to-one interaction with kids. And they're setting up those Zooms and they're having those phone calls and they're working on that to provide those services the best they can. It's not a perfect world. I'm not going to deny that for 1 minute, but I really think that they're figuring that out as they go on how those services are going to be provided. And it kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier. We wanted to solve a lot of this because we could see this coming in the future for snow days and the like. And those were all questions and hurdles we were going to have to climb during that time as well. So we really wanted to attack it here when we felt like staff had a lot of time to work through this. Not perfect, but that's a lot of what they're doing. And I really put my process coordinator in charge of collaborating all that. They have a meeting that they do as a SPED group once a week. And then, like I said, you can go into our announcements. You can see when the SPED people are available for hours of Zoom that you can Zoom in. They are making those calls. They are making those contacts out as well. It's a two-way street. And so far, knock on wood, the parents have been happy. The other thing I did with my assistant, since currently right now she's not doing much, she would normally be the one in the building that would greet people, work on all that. She took an old cell phone that we had, and she is actually calling every day parents, just going down the list of our parents and doing wellness checks. And one of the things that we're finding is that is being very productive to the overall cause, because we're doing a lot to reach out. These parents are understanding the efforts that we're going through to keep this going and to meet the needs of students. And I think that's going to help. Legally, does it cover and check all the boxes? No, absolutely not. And I don't think anything we ever do would. But I also would argue that a lot of times in the classroom, you're not seeing that as well. So therefore, are they appropriate concessions? And my thought is yes.
We had a question that was posed, and I think it was answered, but I want to double check. Desi, did we get an answer from Desi in EOC exemption for graduates? We did get an answer on that, correct? That they are exempt, that we're not doing EOC?
Yes, I believe we did. And also, John, back me up. Did we also not get one on A+ eligibility for EOCs as well for algebra?
Yeah, that's correct. The senior class will not be required to meet the Algebra 1 EOC requirement for just this graduating class.
They also limited the number of hours to 25 as well.
All right. Anybody have anything else to add before we close? All right. I'll look forward to seeing everyone Wednesday. If you want to join the statewide Zoom with David Guerin, we do have 500 seats available for that Zoom. And if you don't want to join that, I'll see everyone here next Tuesday, 9 a.m.